Hi, and welcome to Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Euler. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Today, John Euler sits down with Ed Sparrius to discuss the Free to Change study. It's a study where 78 ex-LGBT people all had the chance to discuss and answer some very pertinent questions. What's this study all about? We're going to get into it right after these. ExposingSoji123.com provides all the info you'll need to protect your children and family from this transgender ideology. ExposingSoji123.com has done all the work for you, extensively researched and well written by a concerned father, Pierre Barnes, who's been researching for the past 3 years, providing this invaluable information in this time of great need. With dozens of letters pre-written to every official you can think of within your province, the documents provided are fill in the blank so you can amend and send. It's that simple. Plus, while you're visiting the ExposingSoji123.com website, you'll also find info on teachers' misconduct cases related to sexual abuse in your local area, and the pornographic books that you've been hearing so much about in your local school libraries. Make your voice heard and count for the children to the highest levels of provincial and so-called federal political leaders, health ministers, school board officials, and more. ExposingSoji123.com, where the facts are real. Welcome back to Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Euler. I'm Brad Wilder. Today, John sits down with Ed Sparrius. Let's bring them in right now. Guys, you've got a lot to discuss with this brand new Free to Change study that Ed has conducted. 78 ex-LGBT people coming together to answer some very, very important questions to kind of get a handle on, well, several different issues. But I think the main one for you, John, that you want to discuss here today is what?
Well, we're looking at the topic of conversion therapy, supposed conversion therapy, right? Those that have sought to limit any discussion, any providing of alternative information, have used this term, used this phrase, really ultimately to limit choice. And Ed, thank you for joining us. You are from Australia, so I should say good evening from North America, but good day down under. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for the invite, John. Really appreciate it.
And Ed, you and I have a mutual friend, Dr. Elizabeth Taylor, not the movie star, but a brilliant woman who she was the person to connect me to Judith, the late Dr. Judith Riesman. So Elizabeth and I have become fast friends, and we all connected. And the study itself is not necessarily new, but it's going to be new here to our audience, but it's only a couple of years old. Ed, you decided, and so we'll set the stage so people can see, I might as well hold up here. This is what we're talking about. And what's doubly important for this, I should say, is I contributed to this, or you asked. And so I'm very heartened that this particular, and it's a beautiful book or booklet. It's full color. And this was given to members of Parliament in Australia. And it's available online. We're going to show people where they can access this. But the title of it, do you want to describe it? Let me see if I can make sure it's not reflected. There it is, Free to Change, survey of 78 ex-LGBT people. And it was a very scientific study because you all found yourself in Australia, and New Zealand's gone the same way, Canada is the same way, and the U.S. is heading there. And so many Western countries have found themselves having to battle with this tidal wave, the tsunami of the trans stuff, and then the legislation that inevitably follows that limits freedom. Yet they're not going to talk about that. And Ed, you had sort of had enough of that, and you decided to spearhead a study and gather professionals together to speak to that issue, to inform members of Parliament. Did I summarize that well?
Yeah, really, really well, John. Here in Australia, of course, we had the same-sex marriage legislation go through a number of years ago, and we all stood back and thought, well, we'll see what comes next. And the conversion therapy legislation was only a couple of years afterwards. which of course stops people who are in the LGBT lifestyles, if they really don't want to be there for whatever reason, from being able to seek assistance of any sort whatsoever. We've got a university here called La Trobe University, and they put together what they called a study, an academic study, that justified this legislation. And we looked at that, and it's an absolutely appalling study. If this is an academic bit of work, La Trobe should hang their heads in shame. It has no statistics. It just has cherry-picked comments. And basically, if you look at it, all it's really doing is criticising churches and talking about a few people's experience. So we thought what we would do is run a proper study and invite as many people as we could to contribute to it. And we had 78 people. We would have had a lot more, but we were very stuck for time. The legislation was foisted on us out of the blue. And because we didn't have much time and we had a little problem with security on the website, so we pulled it down for a month or so and then put it back up. So within about a 5 to 6 month period, we had that many people turn up. If we had the same time as La Trobe, we probably would have had a couple of hundred people. But their experiences were very, very eye-opening. They really countered the narrative that's being pushed in the media and into governments at the moment.
And that's crucial. The numbers are crucial for people to understand that you could have, because the website was basically being attacked, you had to shut it down, but you could have had a couple of hundred. So this study, even still with the numbers at 78, that's a very good size sample because these are people's lived experiences. And what you're saying is you saw this legislation, this quote unquote anti-conversion therapy legislation being rammed through Parliament, and there was this shoddy research study, and that's what was being presented to members of Parliament to persuade them to go along with this. And you felt, wait, there needs to be a counter argument. And so you all set to work. And let's talk about that, because then, Ed, we're going to also have you talk about and bring us up to speed now in retrospect, what has happened. So anytime legislation that's coined or uses the term anti-conversion therapy, and they get that into legislation, Canada has it, New Zealand has it. Aside from the terminology, we're going to find out really the real purpose of this, what's the goal, and what is the net effect of this kind of legislation that's based upon flawed research. Therefore, this research is well done. So talk to us about let's talk about the research itself. I'll even bring up, when you give me the go-ahead, I'll bring up some of the visuals that we have prepared.
Yeah, I just can show you how La Trobe performed. They spent nearly a year. They hunted around looking for people who said they'd been hurt by conversion therapy, in other words, being talked out of living their gay lifestyles or whatever. They, in that year, could only produce 15 people. Once they found out that our study was on the way, we found out through contacts that we had, they ran a second study and engaged Macquarie University, and they were paid money by our government, the Victorian government, who's a very socialist government. They were paid and funded to do that study. And after 2 years, they produced a sum total of 35 people who claimed they'd been hurt. So we, in 6 months, with no money, just volunteers, with people who were really eager to share their experience, produced these 78 people. The point that we make is this: we're told that no one changes. If you're gay or if you're transgender, this is innate and you never change. And we were simply saying, well, if you can find even one person who changes, that throws the narrative down the drain. But if you've suddenly got almost 100 people, then you have a serious problem. The governments are saying no one changes. But these people are saying, well, I did, and I changed for the better. So I'm not really sure exactly whether you want to go straight into the statistics, but there was 3 goals that we were looking for, 3 things. One was, do people actually change from living LGBT lives? And yes, absolutely they do. Do they have improvements in their lifestyle? Absolutely. We took statistics, whereas the La Trobe study took absolutely no statistics. We took statistics. We had a series of questions that people came to the website. They would answer those questions, and they were all quality of life questions. And then also, was it a long-lasting change? And again, a great number of the people had left their lifestyle 10 years ago, many 30 years ago. And so if people are saying, well, you might leave the LGBT life, but it's only for a short time, you're going to go back again, that's simply not the case for this group. Everyone in this group left their lifestyle and have stayed out of it. That's contrary to the narrative being pushed by our governments.
That's right. And what part and parcel of this, because they call it anti-conversion therapy, it's not so much aimed at individuals living their lives that decide to make a change, but it's those that, as they are thinking through things, as they're noticing certain things about themselves, about their emotional state, their mental health, that maybe they become concerned about or they feel distress, they're probably going to seek out some help, some professional help. So the legislation that this study was designed to inform was really, and this pertains to Australia, all Western countries, right? Because this is a very strategic move on the part of those that don't want people to be free to change, and they don't want anybody to come along and assist with normal therapy, with normal exploratory therapy. So anti-conversion therapy is geared at mental health professionals. Basically, it says this: hands off. Don't talk to them. Don't work with anybody in an alternative lifestyle, because if you do and they decide to change on their own, so free to change, and you, Mr. or Mrs. Therapist, you've converted them away from their true identity and self. And so the idea of being free to change also then means they should be free to explore what is or isn't in their best interest. And that runs counter to the narrative, because this anti-conversion therapy tries to paint a false narrative, which is once gay or once heading down a certain path, they should always be going down that path. And what I say is, we need to ensure that people's choices and decisions align with their values and goals. We need to be about the business of empowering people. So in the mental health field, we're not here to convert anyone. We're here to help empower people to figure out what's in their own best interest, not limit them. And they need to be able to be free to reconsider. And so this study, Free to Change, what you found, Ed, and we're going to go into that now, is that if given an opportunity to be able to freely choose a therapist of their own choosing, be able to freely explore whatever they want to explore, that sometimes you're going to have people that decide to reconsider an alternative lifestyle, and they not only are well-adjusted, they're happier because they were now able to explore that, and it now aligns with who they are, and it's lasting.
And look, you talk about counsellors and therapists. It's not just counsellors and therapists it targets parents. So if you have a child as a parent who suddenly, the little boy comes home and says, "Mummy, I'm a girl," and you say, "Don't be silly, you're a boy," and you try and encourage him in that way, you can, down the track, or even if a relative discovers that, be dragged before the court. So it's just made aware that we haven't had much as far as legal action going on as far as we know. Keep in mind, a lot of this happens behind closed doors. We're talking about courts that aren't open. But what we have heard is there was a grandfather whose little grandson started talking about being a girl, and the grandfather apparently said to him, "No, you're being silly." And he was dragged before he was summoned to explain himself. So this is very much targeting families as well as professionals. And then, of course, you've got in the middle of that, you've got the pastors in churches who are asking for preachers, coming and asking for advice and saying, "Look, I'm not comfortable being gay," or whatever else. That preacher, if he was to say, "Well, I can help you with this problem, we can pray together," they then can be dragged before the courts and be charged. And in Australia, the punishment is quite vicious for an individual. In American dollars, it's around about $12,000 American dollars is the first time round fine. and for institutions such as a church, it's 650,000 American dollars. So the fine is quite hefty, and of course there's 10 years of incarceration there as well if they really want to.
And to help really or the context, and what you're describing is, and this has happened, and you can either have somebody genuine or a setup. So somebody attends a church and they begin to wonder the lifestyle that they're in doesn't mesh with their own spiritual values, or let's say they want to believe in the Christian doctrine of how one might conduct him or herself based upon what Scripture says. And they decide to go to the pastor and say, Pastor, I've been in this lifestyle. I don't know if I want to do that anymore. Would you counsel me, or would you pray for me? And if that pastor does either, and that person decides to leave the lifestyle, and what you're saying is with this legislation, then civil penalties and or criminal penalties can be brought to bear.
Yeah. And it's worse than that, John, because that person might want to leave the lifestyle. The pastor might be happy to assist them with that. However, a third person might take offense and report that situation, and the pastor then gets brought before the courts. And again, the pastor will not necessarily know who has brought that accusation, and he will not be able to defend himself and say, look, I'm sorry I didn't, or I'm sorry this was a circumstance. He is presumed to be guilty and somehow has to try and clear his name, and it's virtually impossible.
And that's why that's okay. This is like a lawfare, right? They've used the courts to do what they couldn't do otherwise in this draconian kind of method. So this is used to silence anyone. And therefore, and same thing for pastors or therapists. So if I, as a therapist or as a pastor, or as you said, potentially parents, if they know that really then even possibly interacting with anybody in an alternative lifestyle. So much for inclusivity, that if, here I'm doing my job, or I'm a pastor, and somebody walks up to me and says, I'm in an alternative lifestyle, and I want to think through that. I want to rethink that. I don't know if that's for me. Then if I'm into self-preservation, part of that's normal, then I may not even choose to interact with that person.
Yeah, and I mean, the Christian life is very much about changing from one lifestyle to another. And so pastors would simply be doing this in whatever area, whether it's in someone who's got a drinking problem or a gambling problem or an abusive problem. This is a different problem that the person might see in their life that are looking for help. Pastor would naturally see that as part of their job. With the therapies, roughly 75%, and all these statistics, by the way, are in the study, and there's also a small summary that can be downloaded. But of the therapies,
Ed, as you're talking, let me go ahead and bring up where people can find this. Why don't you go ahead and share the address of the website?
Okay, so it's freetochange.org. So quite simple. You don't need to put all the www and all the extra in, just freetochange.org. The book you see on the left is the full study. The one in the middle is the summary. So the full study has about 120 odd pages. It's got a whole lot of information. John, you can.
That's the one I'm holding up right here.
Yep, and you can download that as a PDF. And so that has a preamble, the study, and it has then got some articles by yourself and a number of other academics and professionals. And then what we did was we made it available for the people who had left, who took part in this study, to give their testimonies. And so there's quite a few testimonies that are written in there, and we left them totally unedited. So we could not be accused of changing.
Did this change on your screen, Ed? I need to make sure, since this is...
Yep.
Okay, there we go. So if somebody actually wants to have a PDF version of it, you can see over on the side, you have a lot of chapters. There's all the stats. And of course, I can't help myself. If you want to read chapter number 5, now who would help with that? All right. So I helped contribute to that, but a lot of brilliant individuals were part of this. It's multiple chapters, very attractive book. And so it's available then at the site. Oh, those are the stats. We'll go into that. So they can download that. Let me see if sorry, I'm flipping through here. As a matter of fact, Ed mentioned about CAUSE, because CAUSE is the organization that you are a part of that helped spearhead this study.
Yeah, so CAUSE, which stands for Coalition Against Unsafe Sexual Education, as it says in the title, was set up some years ago when we started finding the gender ideologies in the schools, and we've been attempting to, or we attempted to stop that. We weren't successful. We passed out quite a lot of flyers into our electorates when we had an election, and at the time we were very early on, before many other people were aware of what was going on, and so we like to think that we at least lit the flame, because over time many different organisations and individuals have suddenly started saying, what on earth is going on? We didn't know this was happening in our schools. We didn't know our kids were being presented with sexual material that, we couldn't even put some of this material on the TV and say to people, are you aware that your kids are being taught this, because it went against broadcasting and advertising standards, yet it's being put in front of our kids in schools. So that's what CAUSE was set up by. It's set up by a group of parents and interested people. And so we set up this website as an information website. It's, again, got a lot of information on it for people who are interested. Yes. A lot of good articles in there by professionals. You can see Professor Diana Kenny, and there's other people who have been involved in contributing to it. So that's our information website, and that's stopsafeschools.com. as opposed to the study, which is the freetochange.org. So we have two websites. The Free to Change was specifically set up to run the survey and produce the Free to Change study.
And as a disclaimer, so that people know, once this draconian law came into effect, you actually had to give over control and really oversight. You gave over these websites to organizations in the U.S., so you don't run these anymore.
Yes, we were concerned that we would be summoned before the courts, falling foul of the legislation, and we would have been forced to pull the sites down and possibly even to destroy the information on them. So to make sure that didn't happen, we handed them over to an American organisation who looks after them now.
There we go. So Ed, your study, the Free to Change study, had over twice the number of participants than the La Trobe University study. And if people want to try to criticize you, this study has really solid stats. So why don't you walk us through what we're seeing for those that aren't familiar with stats, and we'll scroll through the pertinent, you can even tell me what slide you would like to go to. I should have shared the screen.
Sure. Here it shows you the demographics. We were very interested in getting a wide range of ages, a wide range of nationalities, and obviously male and female, wide range of people's sexual experiences. We didn't want just one. We didn't want all homosexual men or queer people or whatever. And I should explain too, we stuck with just LGBT. We didn't want to have an ever-growing name, so we just called it 78 ex-LGBT people, but it encompasses all people in those sort of lifestyles. The study also shows here, it shows the ages of the people who are involved. It also talks about when they started the interventions, in other words, when they actually went and looked for help. And some people, by the way, didn't look for any help at all. They just left the lifestyle on their own. But about 75% of people had some sort of assistance, whether that was professional, whether it was spiritual, whether it was camps or whatever else. But most people needed some help from someone else. And so the point is, if now in Victoria, Australia, and other states as well, if people want to leave this lifestyle, they can't get that help. If they do, and certainly I'm sure some people in the background are still trying to help them, those people who are assisting are the ones that are going to face the courts if they get reported. And that's a huge problem. Again, here it shows we broke it up and told people what the identities were before their sexual orientation or gender identity before it started, where they went afterwards. And not everybody became heterosexual. You know, we get accused of trying to convert gay people and make them heterosexual. Some people who were gay did become totally heterosexual. They'll say to you, yes, I am totally heterosexual. Some people at the other end of the scale are saying, look, I'm still same-sex attracted, but I'm not living that lifestyle anymore. And the cohort spread between those two extremes. And we were quite happy with it. That wasn't the issue. The issue was, did they leave the lifestyle and stop being part of that? And that was what we were looking for.
Hey, Ed, I got a real quick question for you. Ed, I need to know this, and I think the viewers should be aware of this as well. What was the average length of time that these people were part of the lifestyle, the LGBT lifestyle? Because I'm curious to know if this was a fad and people just, tried to open up with their own sexuality based on things that they've learned throughout the last few years, or whether they were actually in the lifestyle for, years on end where, they broke away and became, I guess, wanting to embark down that change.
Look, that's a fair question. Something we didn't ask them, but you can read that into the ages at which they started seeking assistance. I mean, people don't suddenly, at age 40, say, I'm gay. Most people would have lived that sort of lifestyle for quite a while. And so in there, we do have in the stats at what particular age they started looking for assistance. Yeah. And you sort of work it back from that. So if you've got a 35-year-old, you can be relatively sure that they've been involved in a homosexual lifestyle for a minimum of 5, if not 15 years. I think you'll find there's very few very young people in that group.
Wait. Why would you assume that? Why wouldn't you have asked that question? Why wouldn't you have got to that answer? I'm just curious.
It's not one that actually crossed our minds, to be honest, Brad. Maybe you should have shot that to us earlier on. We would have asked it then.
Well, I just think it's important because I think that understanding that over the course of the last 2 to 3 to 4 years, I mean, this has ramped up even more so. I mean, we say 2013 is when things took off, but we've seen more of this fad being accepted in society within the last few years, which leads me to the question of, I have gay family as well that live out in Vancouver, and they've been gay for a very, very long time, and I don't think that they'd ever go back now. One of them was previously married and a heterosexual, had a couple of kids, but now lives the lifestyle the way that they do. But I mean, I don't see those. I haven't heard of many people like that transitioning after a lengthy lifestyle like that. I'm really curious to know whether these are individuals who have, like I said, tried the fad. It's like putting on a pair of bell-bottom pants or jeans. I'm going to wear them for a while. They're hip. They're cool. Look at me. How about go along to get along? Was that something as well that kind of fits into this a little bit? People wanting to say, well, I accept it all, and they don't want to fight with anybody, so they just go along with it. Next thing you know, they try it out thinking it's okay. Then they go, wait a minute, I don't want to be involved anymore.
If you read the testimonies, and there's also on the website, the actual study, if you download it, has written testimonies. The website also has audio and video studies. All of them talk about their lives, and you can, if you read those, you'll see that they've been involved in the lifestyle for quite a considerable time. So when I'm saying we don't have an exact number of years, these people certainly didn't do it as a fad and suddenly decided to bail out. They were people who were very involved.
So we see a lot of teenagers today doing that, Ed. We see a lot of kids like trying and testing the waters, and it's cool and it's hip for now. But again, it was, now all of a sudden it isn't anymore. I've seen kids like that over the last couple of years, my daughter's age, who have been in the same sort of position where one day they're calling themselves bisexual, and then the next day they're not.
I think that's because over the last 10 years or so, Brad, they've been pushing this stuff in schools, whereas the majority of people that came to our study, because we were wanting to see whether it was long-lasting as far as the change went, the majority of those people were in the LGBT lifestyles before all this stuff was being pushed in schools. I mean, it's cool now for you to be gay or to be a lesbian or whatever else,
Right.
And that's being promoted in schools, and that's really skewing all this. what that does to the kids down the track when we know that those lifestyles are often associated with depression and anxiety, and suicides ultimately. Only time will tell, but I sort of shudder to think how these kids are going to end up when they're being pushed into this or dragged into this lifestyle by society saying this is a cool thing to try out. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I asked that. I'm glad I asked that question, because I think that, you know, there's going to be parents out there who are trying to understand where their kids are headed. You know, again, this lifestyle is a lifestyle, and you can test the lifestyle for a while and, you know, bow out if you decide to. But once the, I like to call them pimps or the groomers, they get a hold of these kids, and the next thing you know, they're forced into it, and they're pushed into it, and they're not released at all. So them coming out of it is a really tough thing for them to deal with. And I'm sure parents who know that their child doesn't want to be that way anymore is also having to go through a heck of a hardship to pull their kid away from it. So yeah, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
You just need to talk to John and ask him how many people he's counseled who've been sexually assaulted. You know, like we talk about the Catholic Church and some other places where these boys have been sexually assaulted, dragged into this lifestyle, and you'll find that a lot of those, particularly boys, because that's what happened there, they enjoyed the sexual experience but had huge guilt that goes with it, and anxiety and depression afterwards. And that's when you're saying the kids are sort of getting involved in this now, and then, you know, maybe later on it's a bit of a fad, we'll get out of it. The results that go on afterwards is quite horrendous for these kids.
As a matter of fact, that's the perfect transition to, we can talk about the emotional states, because, and Brad, those were excellent questions. And really it hits at the heart of this quote unquote anti-conversion therapy legislation that's being rammed through parliaments and legislatures, that if somebody, regardless of adult or young person, if they don't have the ability to sit down with someone and to process this, as I've mentioned, there are 9 red flag, key red flag indicators of sexual abuse. Yet if those are now reframed in terms of gender and gender confusion and indicators that they are trans, then we really have limited the help. We've failed as mandated reporters, quite frankly, and we haven't helped someone be able to explore. So this legislation limits freedom. So the people are not free to change, they're not free to reconsider, and they're not free to explore, and they better not have a therapist that's going to help them do that.
I don't know if you guys have seen the Reddit, the trans site. That now has around about, I think it's 50 to 60,000 members, and many of them are kids who over the last years got involved in living transgender lives and now want out of those lives. And their stories on there are absolutely horrific. You know, some of those kids, it was just a bit of a fad. Some of them have lived a long life and had sexual surgeries and all sorts of things. But it is a huge number that we now have trying to get back out of that lifestyle. And we're being told, oh no, these people it's innate. They don't really want to change. But here we have just one of a number of social websites that is actually showing tens of thousands of kids or young adults now who's saying we've made a horrendous mistake and we've destroyed our lives, we've damaged ourselves. We're sexually incompetent. We're on hormones that we can't ever get off. We're sterile, and this just goes on and on and on. And it's going to be a lot worse because so many kids around the world are getting involved. Here in Australia, they're just now our Plastic Surgery Society. The doctors, they now want to be able to, on our Medicare system, be able to carry out sexual reassignment surgeries, and they're estimating 50,000 young people are waiting for surgeries just in our country. So we've only got 27 million people here. But that's just now. This is after pushing this stuff in schools for 10 years. What's going to come down the track? We have no idea if this isn't stopped.
Sorry,
I think sorry.
Yeah, 50,000 are on that Reddit detransition. Anybody can go on there. It's just the detransitioner part of Reddit. I'm not up on Reddit. I forget the term, but it's that section. You just type that in, detransitioner, on Reddit, and you'll see it, the group. But 50,000, I think it's only been in existence 6 or 7 years. So
not very long at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
So sexual abuse prior to joining the lifestyle, and then joining the lifestyle to continue being sexually abused. How does that make sense?
Right. That's why this is a predator's. Talk about a racket.
Yeah.
Right. That it's like the Hotel California. If anybody knows that song, you can check in anytime you like. You just can't ever leave. That's a cult, and cults hate. First of all, cults toy with language, so that's why they won't use accurate terms. They'll say top surgery, bottom surgery instead of double mastectomy and castration, or oophorectomy for women. They won't ever mention about sterilization. They won't mention the word sex change, right? So they are deceptive, and just like a cult, they're going to push people away and say, these are our kids. There's even a term, new glitter family. Right. I've seen plenty of videos out there where athletes that are these guys that are dressed in drag say, you know what, if you feel like your parents don't care enough, we do. We could be your new glitter family. Well, that's cult. That is cult speak. That is cult dynamics. And what do cults say? Once we have them, they are our kids. And so that's why they're using this term anti-conversion therapy, because the cult leader, the manipulator, the perpetrator, the predator is saying they're mine. And if you try to peel that perpetrator's hands away, meaning get rid of the influence that has caused that young person, because the young person doesn't know they're being exploited. You can be exploited and not know it. So all these young kids are being exploited either financially or sexually. I mean, who's got skin in the game? It's these kids. And so it's the pushers of this that want to make sure that these kids never leave their influence, the influence of the perpetrator, predator, manipulator, leave their influence or grasp. And so they've come up with this term that if the child begins to distance themselves, that somebody has converted them. So they've toyed with the language. So these kids are troubled kids. They already have, in the vast majority of them, are on the autism spectrum and have been sexually violated in one way or another. And now pornography is introduced. Now you've really screwed their minds up. And so, Ed, let's talk about what the study saw in terms of mental health, because what we hear is these kids are going to kill themselves unless they can get their breast chopped off or get castrated. And the reality is there's some serious mental health issues in alternative lifestyles. And maybe that's what makes people susceptible. And my contention is that is what makes people susceptible to being unduly influenced.
Yeah, well, very much, we keep getting told that if these kids can't transition, they're going to suicide. Yet in this particular group who left the lifestyle, and we had about 10 transgenders in that group out of the 78. So the suicidal ideation, 75.6%, said that their suicidal ideation had dropped by 39%. So that was a considerable number. The anxiety, nearly 94% said their anxiety had gone down nearly 50% of what it was before they left their LGBT lifestyles.
So the charts, and the charts that we're looking at, the one on the top is before, the below is.
So now what the one on the top is, it shows how many people reported an improvement in a particular area. So in the very top chart, if you look at suicidal ideation, 75.6%, so what's that, 59 of the people said that their suicidal ideation decreased. And if you go to the second chart, it says by how much. So by 39%. Yeah.
That's the improvement on the top there, that all those things got better.
Yeah. The thing that you want to look at as well is self-image. How many of them actually said their self-image improved? And that was, 75.4%, but it improved by 50%. That's a big jump about how people felt about themselves. And you can go and read through all those as to how it went. Physical health was the one that was the least improved, but I guess that's not surprising in our society. Promiscuity, there was also quite a change in promiscuity. And a little bit of a thing on this, when we say, 75% of people said their suicidal ideation improved or decreased, it didn't mean that the other 25, there was no decrease. It simply meant the other 25 didn't have any suicidal ideation, or that was the general understanding of what we got out of the results. But overall, these people's lifestyles improved dramatically, and these charts show exactly that. That's what we were looking for, to see if that was the case. And right from the very start, when we started getting the first numbers coming in, these figures here didn't change. So they varied a little bit back and forth, but they were just so consistent that it was just really surprising as we were getting more and more people coming in that they stayed so consistent.
And there's another chart. I'm sorry, showing that improvement. So there's another chart.
Yeah. And all this stuff is both in the study, and you can also download these charts individually if you want to. There's another web page on there, or page on the website, that gives you the raw data that we looked up. So we were trying to be totally transparent with what we did. Didn't want to hide anything. If we had bad results, we were going to put them up. But we didn't. We just had terrific results with this group of people. We also were very careful that we vetted all of them. We had a number of people try to sneak in and give us dodgy statistics. What we did was we linked through a whole lot of LGBT groups and also pastors of churches and other people that we knew we could trust, and said, okay, this person has come to us. They put this information on the website. Do you know them? Can you vouch for them? And if we couldn't get someone to vouch for them, then we'd contact them and say, look, you need to get someone that we can talk to vouch your story. If that didn't happen, then we didn't use their information. And there was a number of times that happened. It wasn't very many, but it certainly was there. We just wanted to make 100% sure that the people we were interviewing and getting statistics from were reliable, and that we could use, and know that down the track they weren't going to turn around and say, well, we lied and they used our statistics. So that works very well for us. And the ex-LGBT groups around the world helped us with that.
Well, what you just shared was important. What you shared was important because you are really then managing the quality, the validity, the reliability of the outcomes. Unlike, for instance, Sam Brinton, who had a very elaborate story. He's the female luggage stealing, or he's the guy that stole female luggage at 3 separate airports that we know of. It's probably more. He was brazen enough to wear those outfits from that African designer. And the only thing they didn't find was the underwear, because my contention, having worked with perpetrators, is that he masturbated in that and got rid of that. So you listen to his story that has been videotaped, and it's very elaborate. It's very detailed about the torture he went through, that his parents took him to these anti-conversion therapists, but he can't remember the name of the therapist, but he can remember details, and being electroshock, being subject to that, and ice baths and hot water and all sorts of these aversive techniques, behavioral techniques. But what you're saying, Ed, is that you really went to the furthest extent to try to make sure that those that were contributing to the study were legitimate.
Yeah. Yes, and look, we did give them the opportunity to give pseudonyms so that their actual names were hidden, because this is a group who, if you want to talk about oppressed people who leave their LGBT lifestyle, really are very oppressed, because the LGBT activists are really quite aggressive with these people. But what we have is we have all their contact details, we have their names, and we can prove who these people are. So they're not statistics or things that we just made up. The Latrobe study that we talked about, the very first one, has cherry-picked stories and to show the horror of conversion therapy. One of them beggars belief. It talks about a woman who claims that her dad abducted her, took her to some sort of clinic. She was put in an ice bath. She was put on a table. She had electrodes tied to her labia. And she was given electrical shocks. There was a priest, apparently, or a pastor, who walked around quoting Bible texts, walked around the table. And the bottom line is all those things are illegal. It's not like it's conversion therapy. It's a crime to kidnap somebody. It's a crime to put electrodes on a woman's labia to have her naked and zap her. But there's no ever story about who went to court on this.
That's exactly right.
Why was no one charged? Why didn't this person come before the courts? Why were they forced to pay compensation? Nothing. And then you've got to say, well, hang on a sec. How realistic is this story? We need evidence that this is actually truthful. And my reading of it is that I would be very doubtful of the accuracy. The other thing with this particular woman is she talks about at 17 years of age of having been in a psychiatric centre, and then you go, whoa, hang on. So we have a psychiatric patient giving a story that sounds like they're having some sort of delusional episode, and this is taken as evidence to justify conversion therapy legislation. Is there a problem with this? I would think so.
Sorry, your wealth of knowledge. This study is intensive, and it's intended to, and that's why we want people to go visit the website freetochange.org to be able to download not just the entire booklet in PDF form, or you can order it as well, but also access the stats so that if somebody listening to this is in a country where this kind of legislation is being considered, you can give this definitive study, this reliable and valid study, to your lawmaker, because the other side is rushing in with these shoddy studies that look very convincing because they have a lot of these personal stories. Because we think that no one would fabricate being tortured.
Yeah.
And so they play upon lawmakers' emotions, when in reality, there's no way to verify that has happened. But those same people that are trying to push to the forefront, these people that have these elaborate stories of electroshock therapy and all sorts of things, they will poo-poo the lived experiences of people that actually were unduly influenced into an alternative lifestyle, into the trans lifestyle, and decided that it wasn't for them. Or when they talk about how they were fast-tracked and they were given a letter of recommendation or a referral letter in one sitting. And so those same people that will put forth these horror stories that will say we have to believe them because they're based upon somebody's lived experience and nobody would lie. But when these detransitioners talk about how they were manipulated and nobody helped them think through this decision, suddenly those opposing voices will say, well, they're lying or they're exaggerating. So isn't it interesting that we're supposed to believe a smaller cohort that have these very elaborate experiences, supposedly, but can't provide proof or detail and haven't pushed criminal charges, but they will minimize now the people that, for instance, are the victims, the survivors, in my estimation, that are on the Reddit website, 50,000 of them saying they weren't given accurate information, and therefore, according to the study and our position would be, they need to be able to be free to reconsider and make a change.
Look, we had 3 states in Victoria or in Australia so far put this legislation through. We didn't have the study ready till the 3rd state, which was Victoria. In the first 2 states, being Queensland and the Australian Capital Territory, the Latrobe study was very much in the debates in our House of Parliament, being waved around and being read from and quoted. And when the Free to Change study came out, our politicians here, the ones that are supporting us, took that in and started quoting from it. The Latrobe study wasn't mentioned anymore at all, because they suddenly realised that if they're going to start quoting from that study, the Free to Change study would pop up and say, well, hang on a sec, what we're showing is this. So they went very quiet about that. The other thing is, we estimate that the Free to Change study has now been downloaded around about 40,000 times around the world. And yet you will not see it referred to anywhere at all in the LGBT groups. They do not want to draw attention to this. If they thought they could tear the study to pieces, they'd be all over it, pointing out all the errors and all the mistakes and the reasons why it's no good. We have seen nothing anywhere at all criticising it anyway. And we think that that's probably a good tick to say that we've achieved a goal with this.
So we will also, on our site, we'll have the link to this so people can go on, they can download this as well, or they can peruse it. So you have, through this study, and again, I was privileged to contribute chapter 5, all that to say, there's doctors, as a matter of fact, share with people who contributed, because what you have handed people now, whether people going to school boards or going to lawmakers, you've provided parents and other concerned citizens with an actual bona fide study that counters these false narratives.
Yeah. So we had Professor John Whitehall, who's been a paediatrician for over 50 years. He's been very active, particularly in the whole gender dysphoria area. And on the Stop Safe Schools side, he did a number of short videos for us that you can watch, and you can download the transcription as well, where he talks about the whole process, the physiological process and the mental process of kids going through all this. We had Dr. Con Cafetaras. He's a medical doctor. He's an activist in this area, and he was one of the main ones, very responsible for the questions within the study. We also have yourself, John. Really appreciate that. David Pickup from America. David runs one of the largest, I think they call it the regenerative, or one of the clinics for people who want to leave their LGBT lifestyles. And I think David makes a very clear point here. He says, we don't say to people, okay, you're gay or whatever else, we're going to work with that. What they do is they work with people to work through the issues in their lives that have caused problems. And if you look on the website, and his name just skips me for a moment, there's one particular guy there, and he was a activist in England, very much for the gay lobby, very, very active. And he says the same thing. He went for counselling about unrelated issues, and he found that his gay attractions started disappearing. And that's what Dr. David Pickup also says. We don't target people and say, oh, you're gay, this is terrible, we need to fix it. We have people come to us who have internal needs that they need to be addressing, whether it's sexual abuse, whether it's bad parenting, whether it's drug addiction, whatever else it is. And they find that these gay attractions, which have arisen to fill a particular need in their lives, start reducing, because that need is being reduced by the fact that the underlying issues are addressed. And I think that's really important for people to realise. So when these people go for counselling, they're not trying to be converted. They're trying to get their lives back together so they can live healthy, happy lives. That's what they want. And that's what our governments are banning and stopping people from doing. That is, in my mind, a crime. I don't know how politicians can live with themselves putting this sort of stuff through, and yet they do, and endlessly.
And that's really crucial, once again, for us to reiterate that we are not converting people. We are advocating for people to be able to reevaluate, for people to be able to reconsider, for people to be able to be free to change, free to choose. And we say that only nefarious individuals, only cult leaders, manipulators, groomers, predators would want to limit that. Brad, I know that's the concern up there in Canada as well.
100% it is. We've got our own troubles, but they're very similar to Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and it's coming to the US. We're all put under this this situation of, well, threats. It's a continual threat for us, whether you're in Australia or whether you're in Canada. A threat of speaking and providing options other than what the government seems to want everyone to push. There's just no way out of this. We have to somehow change our legislation because it's now become a law here in Canada. And that is where it takes a lot to change a law. It doesn't take a lot to make a law. It takes a lot to change a law. And, I think that every country that's in the shape that Canada is in, whether it's Australia or New Zealand or the UK, and soon to be the US, we have got a judicial system in all of those countries that needs serious attention, no different than our own governments, our political leaders, our own, our own government has been infiltrated by the World Economic Forum, and that, along with the World Health Organization, and the other oligarchs that are part of this all. It's troubling and it's concerning, and they keep forcing multiple issues upon us. But let's take care of our kids first and foremost. Let's take care of the women and the children and make sure that they can't grasp those, well, not those, how about the future of humanity? With that, this is Unmasking the Trans Movement. I want to thank everybody for being here today. There's still more to unpack with all of this. We don't give up here. We don't quit. We don't stop. We say things that other people won't talk about, and we do that for a reason and a purpose. It's to educate and provide you with the knowledge and the information to move forward as this evil ideology continues to knock at all of our doors. I'm Brad Wilder on behalf of John Euler and Ed Sparrius. Thank you very much for being here today, gentlemen. Till next time, remember, it's not our kids' fight, it's our fight. I'll see you soon.